Zhang Henshui's The Golden Fen Family Chapter 45. When Guaman was in support, he was arguing wildly, and Chen Zuan looked at him indifferently and suddenly had a zen idea. Peng Zhen's question made Yu Fen resist. She smiled and said, "They are two different people." Peng Zhen said, "They are both a union of a man and a woman, so why should we treat them as separate people?" Yu Fen said, "I don't think Lao Qi is taking advantage of Sister Shuzhu. It should be said that he is grateful." Peng Zhen said with a smile, "Well, you can't lose after all. Why don't you allow it?" Yu Fen tilted her head and said, "I don't want your boring gratitude pictures." Peng Zhen said with a smile, "You don't expect to repay kindness, but I want to receive kindness and never forget to repay it." The two of them joked for a while. Who is reasonable and who is unreasonable has never been resolved. After a night of silence, Yu Fen said to Peng Zhen the next day, "When things are like this, it is only reasonable that I should give Sister Shuzhu a letter. Otherwise, she will also say that I will cooperate with everyone. To put this matter, I kept it secret from her." Peng Zhen said, "You have a reason for saying that, but if you tell her, she will be very disappointed. According to my opinion, it would be okay if you don't tell her, okay?" Yu Fen said, "Do you think that women from Beijing are proud to marry your Jin family? Why is she disappointed?" Peng Zhen said with a smile, "Why bother us? Are you quarreling with yourself? What I said has my own reasons, and I mean it. Well, any marriage, no matter whether it is a man or a woman, will be disappointing if it does not succeed. This is not because I look down on anyone, but you. Why are you angry?" Yu Fen said with a smile, "It's not that I'm angry, but you brothers have always been good at ravaging women. Even if you say good things, I don't dare to take it as a good thing." Peng Zhen said with a smile, "If you say this, I am completely ruined. What else can I say?" Yu Fen let it go after hearing what he said. In the morning, Yu Fen endured the matter, but privately called Shuzhu and told her to wait at home and come back if she had something to say. After lunch, he went to Bai's house privately without taking a car. When Bai Shuzhu heard about it, she went all the way to the gate and said with a smile, "What kind of wind is it today that blows my sister away?" Yu Fen stepped forward, held Shuzhu's hand, and said with a smile, "What kind of wind is it?" "I was blown here by your wind." Shuzhu said, "I guess you came here because of something." So the two held hands and walked all the way to Shuzhu's house. Yu Fen chatted some gossip at first, then took Shuzhu's hand and sat down together on the sofa, saying, "Don't be shy. Tell the truth. Let me ask you, do you think Lao Qi treats you with true love, or fake love?" Shuzhu said with a smile, "What do you mean by this? I have no way of answering you." "Then you don't have to worry about it. Are you promising me, are you really in love or fake in love?" Shuzhu blushed and said, "I don't care about you at this level. We are just friends." Yu Fen said, with a smile, "Saying this will end the matter, and I won't have to worry about it." Shuzhu said with a smile, "I don't understand what you said. How can I make you worry about it?" Yu Fen paused, smiled slightly and said, "You don't want to believe what I said. But you and Lao Qi are finally close friends. Didn't you say that you and Lao Qi are nothing more than friends? He really followed your words and treated you as a friend. Love between two? It seems we can't talk about it." When Shuzhu asked, she already expected that he was here for marriage. "But what if you don't know it's good news yet? Or bad news?" Now that Yu Fen said this, Daba Cheng knew that Yanxi had changed his mind. He asked, "Cousin, why are you always hesitating when speaking today?" Yu Fen said, "It's not that I'm hesitant. I'm afraid that you won't be happy if I say it out loud, so I don't want to say it directly. But this matter has a lot to do with you. I have to tell you honestly, Lao Qi is getting married. I wonder if you know that." After hearing this, Shuzhu's face couldn't help but change, and she said with a smile, "What does this have to do with me?" "What?" The smile on the corner of his mouth has not yet stopped, and his face has become even more fierce. There was a thin layer of blush on her cheeks, but it completely receded, and her face was as white as snow. Yu Fen said, "You are such a bad person. I came to discuss with you sincerely, but you refused to tell the truth." Shuzhu said, "What truth did I say? I don't understand. Can we stop people from getting married? I have said it before, men in the world are never willing to show their sincerity to a woman. They always love the one they love and throw away the one they love. If you don't let others love you, even if you are cheated by others, then you deserve to be thrown away." At this point, the circles in his eyes turned red. Yufan said, I told you, you are sad, aren't you? But you and Laoqi have been together for so many years, and both of you know each other's temper. In the past 2 months, you two have had several quarrels over trivial matters. That's not a problem. As long as you don't lose your temper and tell Laoqi calmly, he will definitely believe you. Shuju said, cousin, you think I'm so worthless. He ignored me, but I had to lower my eyebrows and beg him. What kind of personality does this have? Yu Fen had good intentions and said it bluntly, but she didn't expect to speak frankly. Shuju couldn't bear it. When Shuju saw Yu Fen talking, she suddenly stopped. Her expression was extremely hesitant, so she smiled and said, that's a good point. Why didn't you say it again? Do you still have something to boo about? Yu Fen said, I'm not jealous. I think you're going to be angry when you look like this. Shuju said, even if I'm angry, I won't be angry with you. How can you help me in a fight? Yu Fen said with a smile, I can't admit this. Do you think I'm helping you beat Laoqi? It'll be a joke if you say it. Shuju sighed and said, actually, you have good intentions. I'm sorry, but I want to maintain my own personality. I will never recognize Mr. Yanxi as a friend again. We are still sisters. If you have something to do in the future, you can come to me, but I will never come to the door of the Jin family. At this point, I couldn't hold it in any longer, and my voice got choked up. Then he said, I didn't let him down for anything. Why did he treat me like this? I knew he had changed his mind a long time ago, but I didn't expect it to happen so quickly. It's only now that I can see through people's hearts. Those words, the more he spoke, the more choked up his voice became, and 2 lines of tears could not help but roll down. She was embarrassed to cry loudly, so she leaned on the back of the sofa, put her hand on her forehead, and just cried steadily. Yufan put her hand on her back and said, don't be sad. Fortunately, his marriage to that girl from the Leng family has not yet passed through the family, so it may not be considered successful. I will call Laoqi aside and ask you to get to the bottom of it. If he does it casually, I will give him advice and ask him to apologize to you. If he really wants to break up, then let him go. The words I would rather everyone in the world disgrace me penetrated into Shuju's heart, and she became choked with sobs even more. At this moment, Mrs. Bai passed by the window and said, who is that in the room? It seems to be a cousin from the Wang family. Shuju was afraid that her sister-in-law would see her tears, so she quickly got up and pushed Yufan with her hands. Yufan understood and went out to welcome him. Shuju was alone in the room. She looked at the wash basin and saw that there was still more than half of the water left. Regardless of whether it was hot or cold, she took a hand towel to wet it and wiped her face. I looked in the mirror again, put on powder again, and then I dared to go out. Because it was my sister-in-law's fault, I couldn't say much, so I made sure to leave Yufan at home to have a light meal in the evening, and then led Yufan into the house to talk all afternoon. Anyone who has something on his mind will feel more depressed and troubled. If there is someone to talk to with him, he will feel better. So in the afternoon, Shuju was calmer. When Yufan returned home, the house was already full of bright lights. I went back to the house and changed a set of clothes, then walked to Mrs. Jin's room to sit there. When he walked into the room, he saw Mrs. Jin lying on the soft couch, and the 3 Taoist sisters sat down in a row of chairs, all facing Mrs. Jin. Mai Li and Pai Feng were sitting around a small round marble table, competing on the 7-piece puzzle. From the looks of it, the 4 ladies here are probably negotiating about something. Yufan didn't come this way, but went straight to see what Mai Li was doing. Before she could sit down, she lowered her arms to the table. Mai Li kept saying, it's terrible, it's terrible. It was so easy for me to find some clues, but you messed up all the signs I put up again. Fen said, what's so difficult about the 7 skills pictures? No one can do it. Pai Feng said with a smile, this is not a 7 skills picture. There are twice as many pictures as the 7 skills pictures, and they are called puzzle pictures. So the picture book, there are also many more patterns on it. It's just a hint, but it's not easy to spell it out. You see, it's very difficult to fish in the cold river snow alone. Pai Feng said, holding a book in his hand, stretched over. Yufan took the book and looked at it. She saw that it was bound on rice paper, with neat lines and patterns drawn on it. This page looks like half of a boat is exposed, with a person on it. The picture only has an outline on the outside, but no lines on the inside. There are more than a dozen small wooden boards placed on the table, some with acute angles, some with obtuse angles, some with semicircles, and some with rectangles, 14 in total. The wooden sign was made of white wood, polished and smooth like jade. Yufan said, "This is interesting. You can put many things on it. The 7 tricks are more monotonous than this one." Pai Feng said, "Just put one up and try it. It takes a lot of thinking." As expected, Yufan followed the figures drawn in the book. Put it together with wooden signs. Unexpectedly, it seemed easy, but this little thing couldn't successfully spell it after trying it to the left and right. Later, the fight became somewhat similar, and another card was added. So he pushed the wooden sign, and said with a smile, "I won't come. It turns out there is such trouble. 8 sisters, come here, and let me see how you place it." So he sat on the armchair next to him, and held it up with one hand. With a chin and a distant look, his ears had long heard that Mrs. Jin and the 3 young ladies were discussing Yanxi's marriage. Mrs. Jin said, "I have always been in favor of your marriage, and have no objections. However, what happened to Lao Qi this time is so strange that I have to think about it." Dao said, "What's there to consider? I've seen this girl. In terms of appearance, she must be 1 size taller than the 8th sister." Miley turned around and said, "Who is 1 size taller than me? I am Zhu Baji, who is taller than me. If you're a little taller, it's just Monksha. Don't compare me to others. Comparing me to others will make you worse." Mrs. Jin frowned and said, "You kid, that's not good. I don't know how to be good at it, but I have learned to be a poor talker." Miley smiled and said, "I'm telling the truth. You can describe her beauty in any way, so why do you use me as a standard?" This little guy, don't you even want to be the standard? Do you know that you have to be good to be the standard? Mrs. Jin said, "Don't argue with her. Let's talk about the child and the engaged person. After talking about it carefully, let me think about it." Dao Jidao, "I have said everything I know. If you want more details, why don't you ask Lao Qi yourself? I will ask you now whether you can agree to it." "Can't agree?" Mrs. Jin said, "I can't agree to it alone. I have to ask your father first." "What does he mean?" "If I agree, I will be fully responsible for it." Dao Jidao, "That's not necessarily the case, and as long as you can make the decision, my father has no objection. If you say this, you are irresponsible." Mrs. Jin said, You are talking about me. Irresponsible? You have nothing to do with that girl from the Leng family, so why are you trying so hard?" Dao Jidao said, "You have nothing to do with the girl from the Leng family, but this one is my brother. My brother trusted me deeply, and I had to work hard. It can be said that our Lao Qi was only 80% proficient in Chinese. Since I got to know him, I can write articles of several hundred words very fluently. He can compose poetry. Putting aside his appearance for now, it is his gentle look that makes people happy when he sees him. He is such a money-spending person. If he is allowed to marry, he will not need a book. It is better for a sociable young lady to marry someone who comes from a poorer background and serve as a key to him." Mrs. Jin said, "You are right about these 2 sentences. Even Lao Qi is easy to deal with. I have a more fun-loving mind than anyone else. If I want a fun-loving little wife, that would be a big deal. It doesn't matter if you want to eat. We are marrying someone else's child, not a family." Runzi smiled and said, "After talking for a long time, you still took advantage of the 4th sister." Mrs. Jin said, "You have to look at that kid too." When Yufan heard this, and saw that Mrs. Jin had already agreed, she stood up and said with a smile, "Mom, congratulations to you. This is a sudden, unexpected happy event." As she spoke, she walked over and saw an empty teacup on the coffee table in front of Mrs. Jin. She took the teacup and filled half a cup of tea from the teapot on the table, then put it on the coffee table, and said with a smile, "You've been negotiating for a long time, and you must be thirsty. Have a drink." While pouring the tea, she sat down on a low, soft leather chair next to the sofa. She turned to Minzi and said, "You 3 knew about this, so why did you keep it a secret?" "We knew it a long time ago, so we could make friends first." Minzi said, "How could we know? We only found out about it yesterday afternoon when we heard about it from brother-in-law Liu." Yufan turned away and said to Mrs. Jin, "Mom, this is strange. Old 7 is such a straightforward person. He would telegraph everywhere if he had something to say, but he kept this matter a secret and didn't tell his family until he was about to start. You always treat him like a child, but you don't know that he has a lot on his mind." As she spoke, she stretched out her right thumb, smiled and said, "I admire our old seventh's ability." Mrs. Jin said, "I am also puzzled by this matter. I have never paid much attention to his marriage, because he tells people everything. He will reveal a large part of what he is going to do before he does. It will not be too late for me to say anything when he shows signs." But unexpectedly, this time, he really waited until he was about to do it before saying anything. Yufan smiled and said, "No one knows a son better than his mother. You, old man, have also seen some of old seventh's signs." Mrs. Jin said, "Yes. I saw that he was close to Miss Bai before, but I didn't expect that. Besides Miss Bai, he has other good friends." Yufan said, "This is really strange. Shuju and Laki are so close, but she is not the match for marriage." Mrs. Jin said, "Shuju is a very smart child, but she has a bad temper. I don't know how serious their private affairs are, so I am always vague about it. You young people are shallow and ignorant. I think it is not right that you always joke with them." Yufan said, "It's no wonder. Think about it, they are so close. What's the problem? In my opinion, they have such a long history, maybe they can still turn things around." Daozi saw Yufan coming over, and knowing that she had something to say, he looked at her quietly, then laughed and said, "Third sister, you are a little wrong, aren't you? Making friends is making friends, and getting married is getting married. If a man and a woman become friends, they should get married, so the 4 words social openness cannot be established. Married men and women can no longer make friends. Old Seven and Miss Bai are just friends. What's so strange about that?" Yufan and Mrs. Jin were talking in a roundabout way, and they were talking for some reason, but unexpectedly, they met Daozi, the elder sister-in-law, who was ruthless, talking a lot, and making a lot of remarks. She wanted to refute her, but she had no choice but to refute her, otherwise she would be suspected of helping Shuju. If she didn't refute her, she would have a lot of words in her stomach, and she couldn't bear it. She was in a dilemma, her face turned red, so she forced a smile. He said, "Fourth sister, what you said is really amazing. She refuted me by saying that boyfriends and girlfriends don't have to get married. But I didn't say that boyfriends and girlfriends have to get married. But what I meant is that the relationship between 7th brother and Shuju is so good that there is a possibility of marriage. This is a fact that almost all of us have recognized. But now it's not them who are getting married, so I find it strange. It's not that I'm dissatisfied with 7th brother." Daozi knew about the relationship between Yufan and Shuju, so how could he be willing to listen? Then he smiled and said, "The more we argue, the clearer the truth becomes. Let's go on." Since the 3rd sister said that the 7th brother had changed his mind, then of course she doesn't agree with the 7th brother. So, naturally, he didn't marry sister Shuju. The reasoning I said before was not wrong. Now you say that the 7th brother and sister Shuju have the possibility of getting married. But we are not sister Shuju, nor are we the 7th brother. How do we know that they have the possibility of getting married? Yufan said, "It can be naturally observed from the surface." Daozi said, "This is too arbitrary. On the surface, we think they have the possibility of getting married, but in fact, although they are far apart, we can't know what's in their hearts. Now there are facts to prove it. It can be known that they had not planned to get married before." Yufan said, "Fourth sister, what you said seems to be very reasonable, but you have to know that people's hearts change." At this time, Lao Qi didn't want to talk about marriage with sister Shuju. That's something that even a child knows. What else does he need to prove? But he is like this now, and he can never be said to be like this before. Daozi smiled and puffed out his chest, clapped his hands and said, "It's not going to be married." He loved Shuju before, but he doesn't love sister Shuju now. What can we do? Even if people around want to defend her, it's in vain. Yufan said, "Fourth sister, what are you talking about? Who is defending what?" Mrs. Jin thought that the two of them were grinding their teeth on purpose and arguing for fun, but now she heard that the tone was wrong. Yufan's face turned red from the corners of her forehead to her chin, from the tip of her nose to the roots of her ears, and she pursed her lips, breathing out of her nostrils. She picked up a newspaper on the coffee table with her hands, chatted with her, and tore it piece by piece, tearing it to pieces. Mrs. Jin said in a serious tone, "Why are you bickering like this over other people's affairs?" Yufan said, "What don't you understand, old lady? Because Shuju and I are somewhat related, I said a few fair words, and fourth sister suspected that I opposed Loki's marriage. Do I still have the power to stop Loki from marrying Leng and getting engaged to Shuju? Daozi sneered. I don't suspect that. In this era of free marriage, parents can't make the decision. So what power do brothers and sisters have? If you don't accept it, it's useless to refuse. Yufan suddenly stood up and pushed the soft chair she was sitting on with her foot. Then she said, "This is in front of my mother. You're so sarcastic to me. I'll give in, isn't it?" She raised her head and went out. Mrs. Jin saw this and was so angry that she couldn't speak for a long time. Although Paifeng was working on a puzzle, she was also paying attention to the conversation about marriage. Here, she was also against Yanxi and Shuju's breakup. But this matter had nothing to do with her, so there was no need to intervene. When Yufan and Daozi were arguing, she was very anxious. Why didn't Yufan have any reason to refute Daozi? She sat aside, took the puzzle picture book, and flipped through it. She flipped through it page by page, and then flipped through it again from the beginning to the end. While flipping through the book, her ears were waiting to hear the end of her long argument. Later, Yufan and Daozi had a falling out, and she wanted to mediate, but seeing that her mother-in-law was angry, she simply said nothing. Mrs. Jin was so angry that she was silent for a while. Then she said to Daozi, "Everyone should talk peacefully. Why do you want to hurt people with your words?" Daozi said, "I didn't say anything harsh. I just said a few honest words. That's how I am. I say what I want to say. I say it directly. If I offend people, I will do it openly. It doesn't matter. I'm not like her, who comes here leisurely like a lobbyist." Mrs. Jin also knew that Yufan was helping Shuju. Although Daozi embarrassed Yufan this time, if we talk about the matter, Yufan is also somewhat to blame. So Yufan left in anger, and didn't say much to Daozi. She just said, "You young people, you have no tolerance at all. I don't know how you quarreled over such an irrelevant matter with just a few words." Daozi said, "That's how I am. I don't like to listen to Song Gongming's hypocritical talk. I won't say anything." After saying that, she also stood up and turned around and left. Mrs. Jin turned around and said to Paifeng with a smile, "Look." Paifeng spoke immediately, and said with a smile, "It's not worth it for you to be angry with them. They can just argue until they are red in the face. When they are together, they will still be talking and laughing." Mrs. Jin said, "I am not angry about their quarrel, but I don't know why. When seventh brother proposed marriage this time, I feel like there is a knot in my heart. I don't know whether I should let him do it or stop it." Minzi said, "Seventh brother has naturally made up his mind about this matter. It may not be easy for you to stop it." Mrs. Jin sat there and did not speak for a long time. Paifeng said, "We dare not say too much about this matter. But since it happened so suddenly, we should give it some consideration. It's not urgent, and it won't matter if it's delayed a year or half." Mrs. Jin said, "Didn't I say the same thing? But they follow the words of us Southerners, and want to strike while the iron is hot. They can't wait to make a decision. After making the decision, they will marry the person. I don't understand why they are in such a hurry to do it. I said it's okay to do it earlier, but they must give a reason. But they don't have any reason at all. How can I not be suspicious?" Minzi smiled and said, "This is just a frenzy of young people. What's suspicious about it? Didn't my eldest brother and sister-in-law rush to get married?" Paifeng said, "We didn't rush. Don't take me as an example. Everyone talked about it and brought the issue away." That night, Daozi went to eat with Minzi and Runzi. Runzi complained, "Fourth sister has said something today. Why, is she going to argue again and turn things upside down? And she offended someone. It's really bad." Daozi said, "What's the big deal? Anyway, we want to do it, and they can't object." While speaking, he used chopsticks to pick up the shrimp paste and tofu in the plate, and crushed it into pieces without eating a single bite. Runzi laughed and said, "This plate of tofu deserves bad luck. I saw you pick it up for 5 minutes, and you haven't eaten a single bite." Daozi also laughed and said, "You don't know how angry I am. I am like this. I can't stand seeing people playing tricks on me. If you have something on your mind, just say it. Why go around in such a big circle? After dinner, I will hit a snag and go talk to my father." After saying this, he took a spoon and kept scooping soup from a bowl of ham and radish soup. The soup soaked the rice in the bowl, then picked up a few Sichuan winter vegetables mixed with sesame oil, and ate the meal. After finishing the meal, he stretched out his hand and said, "Towel." Seeing this, a Nan smiled and wrung out a hot towel and handed it to him. Yin said, "Fourth miss, what's wrong with you today? You look like you're drunk." Daozi took the towel and wiped his face, ignoring Anan, but said to Minzi, "Come later, if I get angry, you can help me out." After saying that, he lifted the curtain and was about to leave, but Anan took a glass jar, opened the lid with one hand, and stretched out the other hand in front of Daozi, smiling. "Don't you want to light it?" Daozi asked. "What is it?" Anan said, "It's Paris Beauty Cream." Daozi said, "It's a nice name, but I don't have time to ask for it." He lifted the curtain and came to see his father. At that time, Jin Quan was walking around the main room with his hands behind his back. He had a half-smoked cigar in his mouth, but no smoke came out. He lowered his head and was thinking about his own things. Daozi thought that his father probably knew about it and was hesitating about what to do. So he went into the house without saying anything. Jin Quan also came in and looked at Daozi. He took the cigarette out of his mouth and put it on the ashtray. He asked, "Do you know much about your brother's affairs?" After saying this, he took the cigarette again and held it in his mouth. Daozi saw it, so he took the light box on the table, rubbed a light, and handed it to Jin Quan to light the cigarette. Yin smiled and said, "Dad, do you know everything? This must be what Mom said. Mom said that she asked you to make the decision. What do you think?" Jin Quan said, "I don't have any prejudice against this matter, but Yanxi is too ridiculous. He lied to me for several months in the first half of the year, saying that he was opening a poetry club. In fact, he spent several hundred yuan a month to rent a house outside. For a girl, he was willing to set up a new family, live with her as a neighbor, and slowly get to know her. He was really attentive and willing to work hard. But if he had such time, why not move it to studying? To be honest, he simply relied on his few dirty dollars to seduce people. The foundation of this marriage is too improper, and there is no benefit in it. Strictly speaking, it is just a sham. My 4 sons are all ignorant of serious matters, but they are working hard on women and all kinds of hobbies. I hate it." As he said this, he stamped his feet several times. Dao Jiwan had a lot of plans in his mind. He originally planned to meet his father and talk slowly. Unexpectedly, his father had already spoken so much before he even opened his mouth, and his face was slightly flushed, and his eyebrows were almost squeezed together. So all the words in his heart were banished to the cold palace for fear, and he just smiled foolishly. But he said to Mrs. Jin, "Mom, I heard that the gangsters are cheating people's money, and they can't spend the money on others." Mrs. Jin said, "Your father is a serious man. He hates these people who spend money in wine and women. There is nothing he has done in his life that he can't tell others. He knows nothing about the affairs of men and women. How come he doesn't talk nonsense?" Jin Quan couldn't help laughing when he heard it. "Madam, why are you insulting me?" Mrs. Jin said, "I said you are a serious person, but you say I am insulting you. Are you a bad person?" Jin Quan said, "In this way, you are a little biased towards Yanxi. Didn't you oppose this kind of marriage just now? Now, when I say this, you seem to disagree. What's the reason?" Mrs. Jin said, "I don't have any opinion on marriage, but I don't understand why you say your child is worthless. Even if this matter is not good, it is a matter between the man and the woman. Why do you blame one side?" Jin Quan said, "Didn't you say that the girl is good at Chinese? I don't think she may look down on our rolling pins, but young people can't stand the temptation of these playboys." Just when he said this, Zhang Shun came in and said, "Chief Li's family urged us to come." Jin Quan walked out. Mrs. Jin said to Daozi, "Listen, this is not easy to talk about, right? In the beginning, this is impossible to talk about." Daozi smiled and said, "It may not be that there is no way. Let's talk about it tomorrow or the day after tomorrow." Looking back, Minzi was already standing at the door of the room. Minzi smiled and said, "Have you hit a snag?" Daozi smiled and said, "No, I don't think the situation is right, so I dare not mention it." Minzi said, "I thought this would not be as easy as you expected. But in this case, that person is really anxious, like an ant on a hot stone, and he has to ask for news everywhere. Just now I came in from outside and saw him pacing up and down in the corridor. He meant to listen to what people are saying here. If he continues for another 2 days, he will be so restless that he will definitely get sick." Mrs. Jin said, "Really? Such a useless person. As she spoke, she came to the main room, lifted the curtain a little, and looked out. She saw Yanxi slowly walking in from the small door with crabapple leaves. Mrs. Jin said nothing, and watched him walk in. Yanxi walked to the corridor. His steps were very slow, and he stopped near the window outside Mrs. Jin's room. Mrs. Jin saw his stupid look, and felt sorry for him. She simply lifted the door, curtain and walked out. So she asked, "Aki, what are you doing?" Yanxi was listening quietly in the room, and suddenly someone was talking beside him, and he couldn't help but jump. He turned around and saw that it was his mother, so he patted his chest and said, "This time, I was scared enough." Mrs. Jin said, "Why are you sneaking around? Come in." Yanxi said, "I won't go. I don't feel well. I want to go to bed." Mrs. Jin walked forward, stretched out her hand and pulled Yanxi's clothes, and pulled him in. Yanxi smiled and said, "Don't pull me, old man, I'll go in." So he followed his mother and went in together. When they got to the room, under the electric light, Mrs. Jin looked at Yanxi's face and saw that the flesh on his face was shrunk and his eye sockets were sunken. So she pulled Yanxi closer to the light, looked at his face, and said in a coquettish voice, "Child, how come you look so haggard in just 2 days?" Daozi smiled and said, "This child is simply suffering from lovesickness. If he is not treated, he will probably lie down." Yanxi said, "Fourth sister, don't joke, mother will believe it." Minzi said, "It's not a disease, but the anxiety in your heart is probably many times more painful than being sick." Yanxi smiled. "Fifth sister is really amazing. Now you understand psychology." Mrs. Jin ignored the conversation between the siblings, pulled his hand, stood aside, and asked, "Tell me the truth, what's wrong with you? Let's see it tomorrow." Yanxi said, "I'm not sick. What should I see?" Mrs. Jin said, "You still say you are not sick. You said it yourself just now. I feel uncomfortable." Yanxi said, "I feel uncomfortable, but everyone forced me to do it. What am I looking at?" Mrs. Jin said, "Who forced you? We are all considering the marriage of the Leng family. We can discuss it slowly. It is not worth being so anxious." Yanxi frowned and said, "Everyone has their own concerns. Who can know? Why should I be anxious about something that is not urgent?" Mrs. Jin said, "I really can't guess how important this marriage issue is, but you don't mention it if you don't mention it, and you have to do it once you mention it. You are anxious if you don't do it happily. I really don't understand why." Yanxi paused and said, "I don't want you to care about my business. I will become a monk in 2 days." After saying that, he sat on the sofa with a stern face without saying a word. Mrs. Jin looked at him like this and couldn't help laughing. She said to Daozi, "Listen to what he said. It seems that if he doesn't get married, he will be trapped by others. If you want to become a monk, then go ahead and become a monk. If you have a son like this, let alone one less, it will be a clean ending if one of them runs away." Daozi said with a smile, "Seventh brother, at this point, you can only talk nicely. How can you be rude? Take advantage of your mother's love for you now, and once you beg for mercy, this matter will be 80% done." Mrs. Jin said, "Who will love him? For a guy like this, let him become a monk and leave." Yanxi said, "Be a monk then be a monk. There is nothing I can't see through. I will leave immediately." After saying that, he stood up and went out. As soon as he left, the wooden board under the door curtain knocked on the door, making a loud noise. Mrs. Jin said, "Look at this child, he gets angry at others." Daozi said calmly, "I think his demeanor has changed. If he makes up his mind, he might really run away. That would be a joke. Isn't Zhao Lianyan's case a lesson for us?" Mrs. Jin initially thought that Yanxi was just angry and talking nonsense. It was impossible for him to be a monk. Now that she heard Daozi say that Zhao Lianyan's case was a lesson for her, she felt that it made some sense. In addition, Yanxi's expression when he left was very split. The more she thought about it, the more uneasy she felt. However, Yanxi's situation took a sharp turn for the worse. Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.